Hi, agency consultant Karl Sakas here. This is agency office hours for January 2021. Coming up today, we're answering questions from agency leaders all over the world. Here's a preview of what we'll be talking about today. Andrew in Ontario has a question about business development. Specifically, how do you avoid becoming the bottleneck in your agency's sales process? Janet in Connecticut has a question about flexible agency models. We'll talk about managers setting boundaries, including what could go wrong if you don't. We'll talk about, Megan in Virginia has a question about team incentives, about motivating your team. And finally, Kim in Connecticut has a question about employee retention. As the great resignation is happening right now, what can you do to retain your best people? If that's of interest to you, keep listening. If you have a question you'd like to ask in the future, we're here every second Tuesday of the month answering your questions. Feel free to sign up for a future event, and you can include your question in the RSVP. As a reminder, we are recording today's session, so don't share anything out loud that you don't want to potentially become public later. All right, well, our first question today is from Andrew about business development. Andrew, if you want to come on camera and unmute yourself, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Thanks for having me, appreciate it.
So when you reached out, you mentioned you had a question related to business development. Specifically, to paraphrase, your question was, how do we build capacity to handle more sales leads so that we don't become the new business bottleneck? If you could elaborate, and then let's dive in to solve it.
Yeah, so right now I'm the sales department on top of a few other things. And like one of the main reasons we have that, like one, we take a very consultative approach. So like we basically help them with their strategy a little bit on our sales so that they feel comfortable we can then handle it when they come in. And because we're niche, so we focus specifically on the Canadian real estate industry, so it's really hard to find someone who understands like digital marketing at a high level and Canadian real estate. Because like, even as an example, like we've had a few Americans who could potentially work, but they kind of understand the American industry, but it's actually just enough different how it works in Canada. Like we don't have escrow, for just as like a random example. So there's little changes across the industries that it's hard to find someone who understands and can do that at like a good level. So I found like I have to be the one to do all the sales every time we've tried to bring someone into a sales role. Now, granted, I think a couple of the issues were on my end of just hired the wrong people for that role.
You're not alone in that, by the way. I mean, sales is perhaps the hardest role to hire for, sales and client strategy. So I'm sure many of the people listening today have experienced that.
Yeah. So like one of the issues, like for example, on the bottleneck side is like a lot of our business comes from me speaking at conferences.
Got it.
And the problem is like, especially like November and real estate's conference season. So I'll do like 3 back-to-back conferences, 3 to 4 days each. So if I have like clients from the first conference, I got to get them while they're hot, but I'm on the road to the next one. So it's hard to have someone who can then kind of close them while I'm still away. Because if they have to wait 3 weeks to even talk to me,
right,
then the odds of closing go down quite a bit.
For sure. I mean, kind of real estate analogy. I had a client years ago who did real estate, and he said that if you're getting calls about on the residential side about listing a house, if someone reaches out to you, if you don't get back to them within an hour, you've probably lost the listing.
Yeah,
for sure. 3 weeks, a lot of time. So, what to do about this? This ultimately is going to be a phased solution. You're not going to fix everything overnight. But I would start by looking at what are ways you can chunk the sales process out. What are the components of the sales process that only you can do? And then what are some where others could do? Either today, maybe on the team today, or hiring someone new and or training someone up. So most likely from what you described, you're still going to be the one, based on your knowledge of the industry, you're still going to be the person finalizing and closing the deal. The question is, what could you do to get other people involved who are more available than you are and who have a lower opportunity cost in the value of their time. Thinking as an agency owner, you could think of your time as being worth $1,000 an hour. Now, whether you actually bill that or not, generally agencies are not billing that much. But if you think of it that way, if you could be billing $1,000 an hour and you could get someone on the team for $20 an hour, obviously that's a better use if they can get things done. So thinking about the conference piece, what is your current process where, say, you meet someone at an event, you do a talk, you meet someone afterwards, you're like, I really need your help. They seem qualified on the face of things. What is your current process with them now?
We don't have like a defined, step by step. We have someone in who's helping us build that out right now for like everything. Right now, it's more a little bit of like kind of my intuition. Like I will book a call with them. I always on Zoom, which is like the closest, and then we just kind of talk about where they are, what they need, and then I basically we have set packages basically. As long as they fit into one of those, I basically pitch that, and then I email. They almost never close right on the call itself. They always want to go talk to someone, and then I send them the link to sign up with a little bit. And then we have a few clients who are happy to take phone calls, so I send them their information. And they normally within 2 days from there will start the sign up process.
And for your target market, is it typically is it like the broker for residential real estate? Or is it more brokers in the commercial side, or who is your ideal client?
Generally, it's residential teams. So it's not we do have a little bit of the individual agents we work with are just starting a team. So we kind of work with people between 300 and $1 million in terms of where they are.
Got it. And so ultimately thinking about it, oftentimes people are eventually, when they grow enough, they might hire a marketing person in-house, but most real estate teams generally don't have a full-time just marketing person. And so you're filling that in. And that creates an interesting challenge if we think about client want versus need. All of your clients need your help. And this is true for everyone really listening today. Everyone needs your agency's help. They don't always want to pay for it or don't want to pay enough relative to the scope they need. So, thinking about that, the ideal next step would be, say you meet someone at a conference, you have some way to track their contact info, and then you could upload that or send it to someone back at the office, or it could be a virtual assistant, to basically get their info loaded into your CRM, into your sales CRM. And then in terms of that next step, sending some sort of a follow-up that asks them for at least a little bit more information. Because just because you meet someone at a conference and they're interested doesn't mean they're qualified. Like someone at a conference years ago, I was speaking about work less, earn more. She was like, oh, that's great. Right now I'm 100% contractors. I want someone else to take over things within a year. I'm thinking, find someone who has a lot of potential, pay him $75,000 a year, and I only want to hear from them 3 times a year. That's probably not going to work between point A and point B for a range of issues. But in that case, it was clear she wasn't qualified. I was at an agency where we were at an industry conference, and I met someone who was, based on their title, qualified. But as I dug into it, it was pretty clear that they unfortunately didn't have the budget. So if we think about the qualifying process, I would recommend asking people to share a bit more. Now, realtors love talking on the phone to generalize. Well, phone and text, right? So if you could figure out some way to extract a bit more information to determine if they're qualified, so that way if you're on the phone, you know that, for instance, their team is the appropriate size to handle your help.
I can find that out. I have connections through backend stuff that I can actually see what their production is that most people don't have access to. So I normally know going into it exactly how much money they make.
I'm sure everyone else listening here is like, oh, I wish we had that kind of thing. So the big thing on the bottleneck is deciding when do you do the first call versus when should someone else take the call. And the key thing with that is, you mentioned the challenge around knowing about the client industry. That initial screener just needs to know enough Now, enough is going to vary by industry. You know, for agencies selling super technical products to super technical audiences, enough is going to be a lot. But for many agencies, you're following a checklist, trying to get a sense of things. And the thing is, you can frame that to your prospects to say, you know, we're selective about the people we work with, you know, just like you are a client. And so before we go to an extended call, we have some follow-up questions. You know, could you share a bit about that? You also may find that some people screen themselves out if they decline to follow the process. It's like if they want your help, especially if they've just seen you speak at a conference, they really want your help, you know, they need to follow your process. Based on that, what would you say are your next steps?
Would you recommend like doing that, like have them answer questions as like with someone live on my team, or do like a type form survey?
In an ideal world, it would be a survey that they fill out on their own. You know, I'll do that where I'll ask someone to fill it out, and sometimes people fill it out within an hour. Other people take a few days. Some people never fill it out. But the good news is if someone never filled it out, I also haven't scheduled an exploratory call with them. You know, so I'm not investing further energy in the potential of the opportunity until they invest a bit back. I mean, in a sense, if someone can't take 20 minutes to fill out the 11 question pre-questionnaire, why should I invest 45 minutes plus prep and things like that as well? You'll have to find the right balance for you. Every market is different. You know, there may be some people out there like, I don't have time to fill something out. Like I'm busy driving around for showings and, you know, this and that. But find a minimum amount of information that helps you determine, are they worth the call? And you'll find that you'll keep increasing that threshold over time.
Yeah, the one thing we've done for that now is we just put all the pricing open on the website, which cuts down the number of calls.
Perfect. And given that you do a productized approach where you have the packages, that makes it very easy. For anyone listening who does more of a customer approach, I'd recommend listing a minimum engagement amount, minimum level of engagement. I did that at actually both of the agencies I worked at. We were getting these requests for people to, they wanted us to develop a free mobile app for them. Like we would do it for free and maybe we'd get some percentage of the revenue. Of course, if you can't afford to pay an agency to build a mobile app, do you really have enough money to launch a business based on that? Probably not. So I added some bits at the time about minimum budget. Suddenly all of those looky-loo leads went away, and did a similar thing at the second agency where our minimum for a website was $75,000 and most were typically more expensive. And once I just put that in the contact form, we stopped getting all of the unqualified inquiries. So whether you're listing pricing in general, or at least listing minimums, that can be a big help. So Andrew, thank you for joining us today. Good luck.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So next up on Q&A is Janet. Janet, if you want to come on, let's see, here we go. Janet, thank you for joining us today.
Morning.
So you have a question about agency models. And to paraphrase, you asked, what are the pros and cons of an on-demand, all freelance team? If you could elaborate a bit more about your situation and what you're trying to solve.
Sure. So I've run an agency for a while. I'm trying to figure out how long it is. I think it's about 25 years, which is frightening.
Wow.
In New York City, we were 100% pharmaceutical, 100% healthcare professional focused, and I had a very large team. That was fantastic. Then we moved up to the northwest corner of Connecticut and had a medium-sized team. And in COVID, you know, like my team has shrunk down. I let the attrition happen, and you know what? It didn't bother me at all. It actually, on some levels, it was kind of a relief, just to kind of let attrition happen and just see like what was left at the end of the day, like what I had to make a soup with. I guess that's really what I let it happen.
Yeah.
You know, because at this phase of my career, I'm like, okay, let the path reveal itself. I'm not going to get nuts about it. We actually came out of COVID quite well. But what I realized was that the new agencies that I saw cropping up, friends of mine were starting 100% freelance. They had no staff, or they had very, very minimal staff. So the good news is I have the bones. So I have the chief financial officer who's like the bomb. I have a chief art director who's our chief creative director who's the bomb. I've worked with him 16 years. I'm the head copywriter. So between my art director, who's the chief over there, we're the co-chiefs, I guess. We can knock out anything. We did expand our business a bit we got a little bit bored with pharmaceuticals. So we expanded from healthcare, it was healthcare, not just pharmaceutical, finance and education. So we're in those three arenas, and tourism to some extent, but that's not as fun as I thought it would be. So we're really in the three markets. So what I'm trying to figure out, I'm seeing all these companies, but the issue I see with them is it's kind of a race to the bottom. I see them bidding jobs, and the jobs that they're bidding, it's like they get the cheapest guy. And I don't want cheap guys. I want really high quality work. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, do you just hire all freelancers? Do you try to build that core team up a little bit? Do you go work for the freelance teams? Like just take my creative team and just go work, maybe 20% freelance. So sorry, I'm blathering from a whole bunch of different directions, but I've got it so much in my head today. And I even exercised this morning. So this is me having exercised. Imagine me not exercising.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you've gone through a number of transitions around sorting through what is the right model for you, what's the right industry focus, how do you want to work with the team? And, as is true for everyone listening, there's no one right way to do things. There's certain things, maybe smart to do things one way than another, kind of thing. But in terms of your overall direction, the challenge that we have as business owners is we can do whatever we want,
That's the problem.
And, I think if it were easy, more people would be employees. And I know we have some agency employees listening today. The nice thing about being an employee is you're not in charge of every single thing. So what do we do? I would say, thinking about the moving parts here, if the goal is to scale the agency up or down, having a stable of freelancers, people who are under contract, you've negotiated what the rates would be, ideally having 3 to 5 people per role, 3 to 5 designers, 3 to 5, 3 to 5 developers, 3 to 5 strategists, a mix depending on the services the agency is primarily providing. And the idea is that, why 3 to 5? If you suddenly need a designer, if you only have one, they may or may not be available. And if you've got 20, you're probably calling them so infrequently that when you do reach out, they're like, I haven't heard from you in 2 years. Like, no, I can't help you next week. So 3 to 5 is sort of the sweet spot. And so ultimately you then bring them in as needed, and you'll probably find that you have people helping on a regular basis. For instance, Melissa, my marketing strategist, worked with her as a freelancer supporting Sakas and Company for 8 years. And she recently started an agency and is helping in more ways as well. But she's not an employee, but she has helped, for a long time, obviously in a, very part-time kind of way. And so that model can work. Now, a key piece is if your goal is to grow and sell the agency, many acquirers won't be interested if it's primarily contractors, under the assumption that, well, they could walk away at any point. Under at-will employment, employees can walk away at any time. And we'll talk more about this in a later segment about the Great Resignation. In a sense, the Great Resignation, if an agency is trying to hire more freelancers, is potentially a plus, because people are tired of working for, there was just an article in the New York Times about, jerk bosses. People are tired of working for, terrible, miserable people. And so if your agency is a good place to work, whether as an employee or as a freelancer, people will keep helping. I've worked with my freelance WordPress developer since 2011. At one of the agencies, and then since starting my business, so you can build an ongoing freelance team. That was something that director John Ford did over the decades, directing Westerns primarily, where he would have the same crew members and often the same cast members in movie after movie. So I would imagine he could say to his cinematographer, all right, here's what I'm thinking it's going to be like when we did this and that, but but this piece is a little bit like that, and they could just get to work, right? Mm-hmm. The big challenge would be if it's a freelancer-based agency and it's a constantly changing cast of characters. That could be hard, but ideally, if you build that ongoing stable of team members, people who've worked together, that things in theory can run more smoothly. Now, if the goal is to do an exit, that may be a challenge. But if the goal is to run primarily a lifestyle agency where you're making money now, taking out money for retirement and things like that along the way, that could be totally fine. Any follow-up questions on that?
Actually, there is. I was wondering how important it is to really find that blue ocean. I did some thinking about this, and I think about this for clients all the time.
Yeah.
We were 100% pharmaceutical healthcare professional focused, and we were just cooking with grease. I mean, I couldn't put the checks in the bank fast enough. We were minting money. When we expanded to healthcare, the budgets got a lot smaller. And when you're dealing with Pfizer, everything was $1 million. There was no contracts less than $1 million.
Yeah.
Which seems impressive when you're doing it, but then when you're doing it every day, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
But now it scales down. So I actually, yes. So what I'm wondering, I'm muted.
Oh.
Did I mute myself? No.
I hear you now.
Sorry. So what I'm wondering is it would now be a good time to go back to looking at healthcare professionals again and just focusing on that? Or is that risky?
I think some of that really comes down to, do you want to work with them? People will sometimes ask me, Karl, what is the most lucrative client industry? I'm not sure there's just one, but I would say that legal marketing, clients tend to pay fairly well. They're very demanding, and lawyers tend to not love their life choices. Job satisfaction for lawyers is not particularly high overall. But I mean, in terms of potential lucrativeness, legal marketing is often there. But that raises, is that an industry you want to focus on?
For healthcare professionals. So it wouldn't be legal. It would be physicians, healthcare systems. I mean, that we're really focused on marketing to physicians.
My particular question would be, how do you like them as clients?
All
day long.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand the voice of the doctor. Like my team does. Sometimes it can be a little bit boring, but maybe this is the opportunity to, take them off road a bit and bring back some interesting life to marketing to physicians, because it's been boring shit for a long time.
Yeah, well, you can, I think that off-road approach, trying to find a different way to do it, that creates a unique opportunity for you. There are plenty of physician marketing agencies that, you could look at the work and it might be interchangeable, because that's sort of the norm. On the other hand, if this would require some market research and customer development on your part, are there practices that want to do something that's different?
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to dig into that, but that may be market opportunity. People mm-hmm. who don't want to do, the stock image of someone in a lab coat, kind of thing. You'll need to dig into it, but I do think it's worth exploring.
Well, the off-road marketing, I mean, even in the segments that we're already working in, we've been trying to look for opportunities there, because I'm just done with the usual crap. If you can exchange logos in a certain category, I'm done with that. Like, I don't want to do that crap anymore. I want to do different stuff. And there are some clients, I actually had to just let a client go because they said, look, we play it safe. I was like, then you're just not a good fit. And, God bless you, but I don't want to do that stuff anymore.
Well, I mean, I think that's a case of, play it safe, say with their patients' lives, but maybe not with their practices marketing. So, well, please let me know how it goes.
I will. Thank you.
As you work through things.
Yeah, it's good to sometimes as a agency owner, as we all know, it's good to sometimes not only talk with other people, but also hear yourself talk out loud because it kind of gets the wheels spinning. So I'm really grateful to have your guys' ears today. And if anybody has any thoughts for me, throw them out. I'm like open to any ideas and opening to partner with other agencies too. If there's an opportunity to work together so we can get work done, bring it on, man. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Well, as you're thinking through where you want your agency to be in the coming year, we have a couple questions coming up shortly. We'll be looking at team incentives, how to motivate and get more of what you want from your team to ensure employers are doing the right things and not the wrong things. And finally, we'll look at employee retention during the Great Resignation. If you've had employees resign recently, you're not alone. If no one has resigned recently, that may not be the case for too much longer. So we'll talk through what to do on both team incentives and dealing with the Great Resignation. But first, a bonus tip from our sponsor. Today's Agency Office Hours is sponsored by Agency PM 101 from Sakas and Company, an on-demand training to help you up-level your project management skills, especially if you're stuck doing PM on top of everything else. So recently, this is talking about boundaries between you and your team. A client reached out about some challenges. They had a manager who was very energetic, but didn't seem to have always the best boundaries with his team. For instance, they had recently purchased a property and the team members were helping amidst renovating the house. Going to a housewarming, sure, that's fine. Picking up a hammer to deal with fixing the boss's house, not so much. And there are some other pieces going on, including like I think it was a bottomless brunch. Look, I'm not saying don't go to company happy hour, COVID aside, go to the happy hour, but you know what? Have one drink, maybe treat people to one round of drinks and then leave. Like don't be there all night long as who knows what's going to happen. So, that's boundaries. And you may find that your newer managers on your team struggle with this more so than you do, though if you do, it's worth taking a look at where things are now. And some of that includes setting expectations for your new managers about what's okay, what's not, what are the gray areas, where are things where maybe you want them to ask you about it, run it by you before they take action. But I have to say, I do admire the agency employees' abilities to rally the team and get them to work on the renovation. I don't believe they had taken the Agency PM 101 course, but remember, when it comes to up-leveling your agency's work and your delivery, PM is good, but make sure you're using it for forces of good and not evil. And if you're interested in learning more about Agency PM 101, Kate is sharing a link to that in chat. All right, coming up next, we have a question from Megan about team incentives. Megan, if you want to come on camera and come on video, here we go.
Hello.
Megan, thanks for joining today.
Awesome, thanks for having me. So when I first submitted this question, definitely I want to see how we can do internal reporting to show where our team members are at and, if there are ways for motivation. I think the bigger objective for me when it comes to creating some internal reports is, making sure that our team is moving at the right pace based off of utilization rate. And, we have some really ambitious revenue goals that we're trying to hit. And so what reporting can I do for our company that allows us to see, here's where we're at for our teams. These are the KPIs. These are the benchmarks they have to meet in order to meet utilization rate. What's an indicator that, we need to nudge someone to move up the pace, or that we need to hire new staff. So, not exactly, the incentives question, but I'm just curious as to, how can we use some of our time tracking KPIs to inform team direction so that we can reach some of those revenue numbers.
Well, consider if you want the team to get results, there's really a chain of things along the way, right? You've got the results at the end, but what's the overall vision? Where are you going in general? Okay, what do the results look like? Before you get into reporting, what are the KPIs? What are the key performance indicators that indicate progress toward the results? So for instance, you're not going to know in January for sure that you're going to hit the full year as of December revenue goals. But for instance, you would know, well, January is probably plus or minus 1/12 of the goal. Most agencies have some degree of seasonality. So for instance, say you're at, half of 1/12 at the end of January. The full year is probably not looking good. On the other hand, if you're at double what you projected for January, that's promising. And so part of it is about getting clear on what is the long-term direction. You mentioned revenue as a goal. How do you get to revenue? Well, that's through billables by individual team members. Every team member should have a billable goal, how many hours per week they should be billing. That's especially true if you do time and materials, but if you do milestone-based billing, you're charging by deliverable. Ideally, you're still tracking to some extent how much work is it taking to get it done, because ultimately your agency's inventory is your team's time. And then working backward from there. So for instance, you could have a model saying, if people are working 47 weeks a year, a particular team member should bill 20 hours a week, another should bill 32, another should bill 10, another should be, somewhere in the middle. You can measure that. So if, for instance, someone is supposed to be billing 30 hours a week, and lately, it's been several months and they're only billing 20, they're probably not going to hit their long-term goal. They're not going to start billing 50 hours a week, working like 80 hours a week in the last couple months. So what are some things you're currently tracking in KPI-wise and in your reporting?
So we are currently tracking, and we're currently tracking hours by client, since we have clients both on project models, so those one-off deliverables, and then we also have retainers, so those flat monthly fees. And our marketing team is mostly on that retainer hourly model. Some of the projects definitely for marketing are that, but then our web development team is strictly time and materials.
Got it.
Oh wait, no, it's the project. It's projects, and so
okay,
correct. Meeting certain milestones, and so the way that we would probably report on team utilization would be different, just because of the differences in models. But ideally, everyone needs to hit that 32 hours per week, 80% billable rate. And so what I've been working on is creating a report where I will pull the hours on a weekly basis and report on, how many hours, billable hours did this person complete? Was there any sick leave? Was there any PTO? Things like that may fluctuate the numbers a little bit.
Right.
And then compare that to like where we're supposed to be for like utilization. And then starting to report on, I actually did some research and looked at a few different Google Sheet, Excel dashboards to pull some numbers. And so right now, just working on those initial KPIs, and then, figuring out how to report that to the directors who manage those teams. And so they're making sure to communicate, this person is at only a 75% billable rate. They need to, up their up their hours in order to meet that goal, or someone who is being overutilized, and we may need to either delegate items off of them or things like that.
I am glad that you're paying attention to overutilization, because that's a good predictor. You know, we're going to talk in a bit about the Great Resignation. If someone is supposed to bill 32 hours a week and they're regularly billing 40 or 45, they are not going to stick around. They have, you know, they have options. So I'm glad that you're looking at both. One thing to consider, you're generally on the right track. The fact that you're tracking things, that you're rolling this into reports for the team heads, for the directors, good stuff. One thing to consider would be, what are going to be your triggers for an early warning system, right? So for instance, say a team member is low on billables, but it turns out sort of there's an obvious solution. Like for instance, they were on vacation. Okay, that happens. Or maybe the primary clients they were working on paused things for reasons unrelated to the team member, and so their billables were down. Or maybe it's a case that there was nothing in the sales pipeline for them to do. So it is important that you identify if someone is running low, why? Is it because they're choosing to not do anything, or is there just no work for them to do? Now, having no work to do is not a complete excuse, because in that case, they need to be raising their hand to their department director or to a project manager or to someone to say, hey, I have some additional capacity. You know, is there something else I could help with? Whether that's helping with another team or working on marketing and you know, digital work in general for the agency itself. The key is that they need to know they should raise their hand. Not like the instant their billables drop, but you know, within a reasonable amount of times. They're not just sitting around doing nothing. That said, ideally, hopefully the billables model includes time for people to do professional development, because sometimes, you know, people will say, well, Karl, people aren't working on, you know, learning and training and things like that. I'm like, okay, well, like, how are you approaching it? And if you have no budget for it and you're not helping people create time for it, you just keep overloading the work, they're going to go somewhere where professional development is valued and isn't just valued in words, it's valued through actions as well. So I think you're generally on the right track. I think the next step you could do would be to look at what is your version of an early warning system. You know, how many weeks does someone have to be off track before it's time for their boss to get involved? And how much beyond that is it time for, you know, the agency owner to get involved? Like, kind of what are the triggers? And that's going to be unique for every agency and even for every role. That's a place I'd look next. The other thing to consider would be, separate from billables, how do things look in terms of client retention? You know, for your retainer-based clients, ideally you're keeping 80 to 90% of those clients each year. Whether you're looking by client count and or, you know, billables, you really want to, you know, look at a bit of both. Of course, on the project side, you know, if someone just needs an initial project and they don't need further help, the fact that they've not renewed, that's okay, right? They've got the project. But the two things I'd look at would be, one, what does retention look like on the retainer side? And then on the project side, if the goal is to get clients to do an initial project and then they go from there to sign a retainer, what do those conversion rates look like? You know, are you hoping that at least half will do it and it's running low? Or are you hoping that, you know, 80% will do it and 99% are doing it? So those would be the two places to look next: the retention or upsell stats, if it's for projects, and also looking at, you know, how is it all fitting together? You know, team morale as well. So good luck as you work through that. I know, but just the fact that you already have that core data about everyone puts you ahead of many agencies. I was working with an agency where they were trying to sort through some pieces and they didn't have any data on that. So now we're going to have to get the data first to then work through that.
Yeah, our team has been very diligent with time tracking. We did just update all of our categories in we use Harvest. And so
Yeah.
it's good to have that as an initial start. And, you know, the early warning system, client retentions are both two other things that I can definitely look into as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining today. Let me know how things go.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Megan. All right. And next up is Kim with a question about employee retention. Kim, if you want to come on camera and on mic, thank you for joining today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the big great resignation that we've all heard about, I think the big thing for us is I have two agencies, one based in New York and one based in Connecticut, and they offer very different service offerings. So one's B2B trade programs, and the other is more experiential activation through the line, all the way from advertising to experiential.
Got it.
And my big question is, how do we retain the great people that have been here? We have some employees that have started with us since the agency started in 2008, the other one since 2016. We're doing such a big, robust effort hiring new talent that we're often overlooking the people that have been here and helped grow the agency. And my fear is, you know, we've kept retention very low throughout the pandemic, and we didn't have to have major layoffs. But I think right now we're all so heavily focused on bringing in new talent. We're forgetting the people that are here, and I'm fearing that they're going to be like, oh, someone's called me or recruited me, and I have this great offer, and we're not putting a structured plan in place for those people.
The fact that you're thinking about it already is a good thing, right? Realizing that long-term team members might feel left out. I guess there's the analogy, right? If, you know, you have kids and there's a new sibling coming along, the existing kids, and by the way, I do not recommend a family model for your agency. Like, your business is not a family. Like, treat people nicely, but you're not a family. But the analogy would be right. You know, you've got the baby brother, baby sister coming along, and for the older siblings, they're like, well, what about me? Like, I used to be, you know, everything, or I was the oldest, or I was the youngest, or what have you. Now, you know, things are changing, and so some of that includes making time to continue connecting one-on-one with team members. You know, when new people join, you're probably doing some sort of a lunch or coffee chat or something, right? You're investing in getting to know them. Whereas if someone has been on the team for 10 years, you're not doing a get to know them, right? Because you already know them pretty well. But it's probably still worth doing a social one-on-one, whether that's via video or in person, as, you know, health aspects permit, to connect with them. If you have an opportunity to meet with them in person, you know, fingers crossed at some point, there's value to that because you're showing them that they are worth your time. Your team knows that your time is valuable as an agency owner, right? And so when you're choosing to spend time with someone, you are telling them they are important to you. I mean, you need to do good things. If you spend time with them and like someone's like yelling at them the whole time, maybe that's not exactly quality time. But you know, the point ultimately of investing that time to show you care, and also listening. And this is true for any of your team members, and this is true for everyone who is, well, listening to the session today. When your team member mentions something that is obviously important to them, think about what can you do to show that you're paying attention to them. I mean, not to the point that you're like, you know, surveilling their house, but, you know, maybe someone mentions that, you know, their kids have a recital coming up. Afterwards, ask how it went, you know, kind of thing. One of my clients had a major sports game coming up for his team, which rarely was getting national attention. You know, and I checked in, how did it go? And unfortunately they lost, but, you know, it was like big deal just even to be there in the first place. So it's like paying attention to those small things, you know, kind of thing, showing that you recognize that they're human. One of my grandfathers was a business professor for 40 some years and a a management consultant. His focus was what we would call today organizational behavior. And I found some of his research from the 1950s. And one of the things he mentioned, based on his surveys of employees at primarily large companies, was this: there was a disconnect. Employees said, I want my boss, my supervisor, to treat me, to acknowledge me as a person, not just as a worker. And that was like 70 years ago that he observed that. Yet how many companies have gotten away with treating their employees solely as workers and not as people? Of course, there is, we were talking earlier about boundaries, there is a limit to that. Someone could be a great person, but also a terrible employee. I'm not saying you should keep someone who's a terrible employee, but that also includes, occasionally, do you need to cut someone some slack? If they've been generally a good team member, you probably should, kind of thing. So, we're looking for what are the little things that you can do to show team members that you care, and importantly, show them that there is a future at the agency, which, depending on the size of the agency, that could include some sort of a formal career path, right? You're an individual contributor, then you're a lead such and such, then you might be a manager, or you might become director of that team, depending on your structure. Maybe there's a VP level above, kind of thing. You don't necessarily need, 20 layers of hierarchy in a 20-person agency or something like that, but people need to feel like there's room to move up. In the past week, I had a couple clients ask, they had promising team members and they want to promote them. What should their next title be? Say if they're a director, what do they go to next? You could go to a C-level title, but depending, that may be a bit much. Maybe it's some sort of a VP role. It could be a VP of such and such, right, of the area they're overseeing, or if they are your number two, just vice president is fine. People want to see a path. I found that with a client 6 or 7 years ago where they had some employee morale issues. People were leaving. Based on my anonymous culture survey of all the employees, people were pretty positive about the agency's future, but they weren't clear on their future at the agency. And based on that, the agency has made various changes to help people see the path forward. That also includes acknowledging that people won't stay forever. For instance, something I'll do for my team members is I will write up a set of resume bullets, some of them with blanks in them about specific accomplishments. But what are the things they will be accomplishing at Sakas and Company? Like, I hope they will stay. I hope good people choose to stay. But I'm also acknowledging that, that it is at-will employment. They may choose to leave. I want them to have had a good experience. Something that I talked about recently with a new client, where one of the things they identified was they want to help their team members live their best work life, right? Kind of create the work that people want to do. There are limits to sort of helping with, life in general, but, in that case, what can you control? One of the things I recommended was creating a team or employee alumni program. And the idea there is acknowledging, hey, we know that our team members go off to do new things. They don't stay forever, but we value them. Our valuing them didn't stop at 5 p.m. their last day, kind of thing. That's actually how I ended up joining an agency in 2011, where I'd been in one agency. I was like, okay, it's time to move on, was looking, and found an agency where I was referred in by someone who had worked there for like 3 or 4 months several years earlier. She concluded pretty early on that this wasn't what she wanted to do. She wanted to focus in-house. And she told the agency owner, who instead of immediately firing her, was like, okay, let's help you find a new job. And she did. And so then 3 years later, that employee was advocating for the agency, knowing that the agency was a match for my goals, not what her goals had been, and ultimately helped me join the agency. And it was a win-win all around. So certainly creating a a team alumni program can be a good way for the long term, acknowledging that people leave, but also, sort of implicitly acknowledging that you don't hate people for leaving. So I know.
And we just had a employee leave 3-4 months ago, but she's now our client. So she brought us to work for her. So that's a dream story, right?
Yeah, and that also, even if they aren't hiring you directly as a client, I've seen referrals come in to agencies when I was an employee, and it happens with clients, where a team member leaves and they come across an opportunity that would be a match, and they send it to the agency. In recent hiring, a business acquaintance had recommended his ex-wife as an employee. To talk about like the relationship there, that, okay, they're not married anymore, but he is still advocating that, like, things obviously didn't work out in the relationship, but that she would still be a great employee. And so think about ways you can create a sense that, they're not in trouble for leaving or wanting to leave. And the work that you do with that, I think, will make people feel more safe to stay, and also potentially give you a longer heads up to say, for instance, I've been here since 2008. As you know, I want to do such and such. It seems like that's not an option here. Is that correct? You might say either maybe there is an option, or if it's not. And they could say, I think it is time to move on. And you could then help them find that next thing. Which is better, getting 2 weeks notice out of the blue, or finding out like maybe a month or two that they're starting to think of looking? You can help them figure that out. In the meantime, you're posting the job, and depending on the timing, you may even be able to get their help training the new person.
Right.
So what is your reaction to all of that, Kim?
I think that there's some great nuggets of that one-on-one, and how to really take advantage, because the one-on-ones that are happening now are very business focused. So turning that conversation around a little bit. We also use a wonderful platform called Standout, which is using strengths-based performance. And so that requires everybody to check in of what they felt and how they felt about the work they're doing. So that's the basis for those conversations. So I think we have some good data already going into it, knowing where employee engagement is. And then on a quarterly basis, those pulses are given of, I care about where the company's going and I care about where I'm going. I think where we fall short is actually actioning the information. So the information's right in front of us. It's just creating the report and looking at it. So I think it's just helping me see that I have a lot of data already in front of me that I can just take into action.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about this, and this is true for everyone who's listening, you want to use some sort of employee engagement software and tool. 15.5 is a common option. Some agencies use Tiny Pulse, though I'm not a huge fan of services that are, how much does it cost? Talk to a salesperson and we'll tell you how much it costs. Okay, maybe not so much. There is Know Your Company / Know Your Team. You ultimately want some idea of what's going on. I have clients who've built their own systems to track that over time. Client showed me the back end and would ask, on a scale of 0 to 10, how are you feeling about things, roughly each week. And he showed an employee who's, usually doing about a 7 out of 10. Suddenly it spiked to 10 out of 10. It was there a little bit, and then it reverted to the mean. And he was like, guess what happened then? And I said, either they got a raise or a bonus. He was like, yeah. But notably, they reverted to the mean again, kind of thing. So just the fact that you're thinking about this, about creating a good experience for employees and your team members, puts you ahead of many companies. There are plenty of agencies that do a good job with this, but for anyone listening, if you're like, ooh, I haven't asked anyone about their non-work life in a long time. Well, good news. This week is your chance. Go do it. Start over the next couple weeks. And this also gets into to the idea of span of control. That's the idea of how many people are directly reporting to you. The general idea is that ideally it's 5 to 7 at the most. A client recently moved up to a new role while continuing to do other things, and at this point has almost 10 people reporting to them. That is a lot of people. Like, it's hard to get to know people one-on-one when you're managing almost 10 people and you've got all these other things to deal with. So certainly, and this is true for everyone, as you grow, look at when is it time to add a new layer. It adds complexity. It's going to hurt margins a bit, but you're not going to be able to keep growing without adding some sort of layers. And on the other hand, if you want to keep a totally flat agency where there's not a hierarchy, if that's your preference, that's fine. You may struggle to grow beyond 8 to 12 people, though, without things majorly breaking. So, Kim, as we wrap up today, any particular takeaways for you?
The big takeaway for me is we've been talking about an alumni program for 2 years. And again, it's that like spark of like, oh yes, that's been on the agenda and we just haven't. And I have a new hire on our marketing team that I'm going to put that on their project first thing.
Nice. For an example, and this is a future content thing for me, for an example on that, one place to look would be the large strategy management consulting companies. So like McKinsey, for instance, they're known for having alumni networks. Obviously McKinsey maybe not doing the best things lately, business-wise, but companies that have alumni programs, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And it's likely going to be more, more connective with people rather than running a company that has thousands of people. So
right.
Good luck. Let me know how things go.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. Well, and thank you to everyone who has joined today. This is Agency Office Hours for January 2022. I'm Karl Sakas. Running an agency is never going to be easy, but it doesn't have to be so hard. See you next month, or if you're watching the recording in future videos, and good luck out there. Take care.